This is the Retro XP podcast, a podcast dedicated to retro video games from the first and second generation with the Odyssey, Atari 2600, and Intellivision, all the way up to Generation 7 with the Xbox 360, PS3, and Wii. On today's episode, I'll be talking about one of my top 10 games of all time, The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. We're opening up with a banger, and I'm going to talk about it all in this episode. There will be story spoilers, of course, so if you haven't beaten it yet and have been putting it off for this long, which who are you? This is your call to go do that right now. Go play the game and then come back to this episode. I'll talk about how and when it was developed, who the major developers were, sales numbers, story, music, and we're going to conclude with my personal feelings on why this game is on my top 10 list of all time. With that, let's get started. Retro XP is now part of the Hair of the Dogcast network. The network has tons of bonus content and episodes on Patreon at patreon.com/hairofthedogcast. So help support us by donating and getting access to bonus episodes and the exclusive Discord community. Otherwise, you can follow me on X, Threads, and Instagram at RetroXPodcast. Whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on, be sure to follow and enable notifications so you can find out when I drop a new episode. Episodes are also live on YouTube. You can follow me there as well at RetroXPodcast. So this game hit the SNES shortly after its initial release in America in 1991. The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past became the third entry in what would become a long-standing franchise still holding on to this day, and will have seen many gameplay changes and, quote, timeline shifts. If you got an initial box, if you got the Super Nintendo right when it first came out and you still have the box, you can look on the back of it and it shows some upcoming games. It's said there's a screenshot of Link to the Past and it just says Zelda 3. So this was before A Link to the Past was the official title. And we'll actually talk about why we have A Link to the Past as the official title later on in this episode. So for those that don't know, the Legend of Zelda series has a timeline of sorts, and I use that term so loosely because I sometimes I just don't believe it's real. Kind of divisive opinion, but I guess it is what it is. With every game to have come out in its franchise history belonging somewhere in the canon. The franchise's timeline starts with Skyward Sword. That's the first official Legend of Zelda game, which came out for the Wii during that life cycle, and is followed right after that by the Minish Cap for the Game Boy Advance, Four Swords for the GameCube, and then Ocarina of Time for the Nintendo 64. It's after this title, Ocarina of Time, that the timeline then splits into three. One where the hero Link dies, one during the child's timeline during Ocarina of Time, and one during the adult timeline of Ocarina of Time. If you haven't played Ocarina of Time, maybe this isn't going to make sense as to why all of a sudden the game splits to three, but this is what the timeline is. During the timeline where Link dies, the Seven Sages seal Ganondorf, who is the main villain of the series, and becomes imprisoned. This timeline begins with A Link to the Past, and where Ganondorf is loosed from his prison and plunges Hyrule into chaos. In this same timeline, we have the first Legend of Zelda and the Adventures of Link, both having come out during the NES years. So it actually comes out. The Link to the Past is actually kind of a prequel, or no, I think this comes out a little bit later. So, listen, I could go further into this timeline. I could talk more about it. However, I won't because it's just too muddy and frankly weirdly complicated. So let's just talk about Link to the Past in this episode, because at the time this came out, there were no timelines and no branching paths. So The Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past is an action-adventure RPG game, and it's a very loose way of saying it's an RPG. It's more of an action-adventure game, I would say. It's not an RPG in the traditional sense like we see Final Fantasy games and stuff with like turn-based combat and a leveling up system. A Link to the Past does not have a leveling up system. This was published by Nintendo for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System and was released in America on April 13th, 1992. It came out in Japan the year before, on November 21st, 1991, and then in Europe on September 24th, 1992. By most accounts and from many magazines, websites, and video game communities all over, A Link to the Past is pretty much considered among the greatest video games ever made, and it's a title that is well deserved. It was ported to the Game Boy Advance, actually, as Link to the Past and Four Swords in 2002, and has sold 6.5 million copies across both platforms by 2004. It was subsequently re-released on the Wii, Wii U, new Nintendo 3DS via that virtual console on all those, and the Nintendo Switch via the Nintendo Classic service, and also the Super NES Classic Edition if you got your hand on one of those. So there's plenty of places to play this game. If you have a Switch 2, you can play this on the Switch 2. Of course, the Wii and the Wii U storefronts are closed, so you can't really purchase it there anymore. If you purchased it before, you can re-download it. Those servers are still available to, you can download things, but as well as the 3DS version as well. A sequel was made for this game called A Link Between Worlds, was released for the Nintendo 3DS in 2013. This title was amazing as well, actually, following the same top-down format as A Link to the Past, and featured pretty unique gameplay, like the ability to pretty much borrow or rent items that got you access into dungeons. You can actually do dungeons in any order that you wanted, so long as you went to go rent the item that was required for that dungeon. And yeah, so A Link Between Worlds ranks up there too as one of my favorite Zelda games as well. Obviously the parity between that and A Link to the Past is a big reason why. A Link to the Past puts the player in control of the protagonist Link, and is viewed and controlled from an overhead perspective, much like the original Legend of Zelda. Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, had a side-scrolling perspective, which was a little bit different at the time, but it was a little bit more acceptable because Legend of Zelda didn't have this storied franchise of top-down gameplay. So a side-scrolling Legend of Zelda wasn't necessarily a hot take at that point. So maybe now it would be. Link could only move in 4 directions in the original Legend of Zelda. Link can now move diagonally as well in A Link to the Past. The player explores the overworld of Hyrule while entering dungeons in order to defeat bosses and receive items necessary for completing Link's quest and granting you access to further dungeons. These dungeons are often multi-level, requiring Link to ascend and descend stairs or fall into holes to progress, which was pretty cool at the time. Link is able to use a variety of weapons and items, with his 2 main items being basically the sword and shield, both of which are acquired early and can be upgraded multiple times. Certain items, such as the lantern and other things, use magic points when used, and this looks like a bar meter and depletes over multiple uses. You'll have to get mana or magic bottles, I guess, within the game in order to, increase your magic points. Not only can you acquire items and weapons in dungeons, but you can also acquire items in the overworld as well. Heart pieces, empty jars, upgrades to equipment. You can actually store fairies now. That is kind of like a revive potion, so to speak. So if you die, the fairy that you're holding on to in a bottle, you monster, automatically revives you, which is kind of cool. So each dungeon has a large chest in it, which grants a piece of equipment that is typically necessary to complete the game and complete the dungeon, defeat the dungeon's boss, and even utilizing it to access the next dungeon, like I talked about before. The major shtick with this game was that there was a light and dark world, so 2 full maps with their own unique dungeons and geographical features. Mostly the same, but slight subtle differences, which was pretty cool. It almost doubled the game size. So, in 1988, development of a new NES Legend of Zelda game began, but 1 year later, the project was brought to the SNES. Due to the success of previous Zelda games, Nintendo was able to invest a large budget and ample development time and resources into the game's production. At the time, most SNES game cartridges were 4 megabit, and that's like 512 kilobytes of storage space. Man, that is small compared to the games that we see now. This game broke the trend actually by using 8 megabits, allowing the Nintendo development team to create a remarkably expansive world for Link to inhabit, which is probably how we were able to get light and dark worlds in one cart. Like Super Mario World, this game used a simple graphic compression method for the SNES by limiting the color depth of many tiles to 8 colors instead of the native 16 color tiles. These tiles were decompressed at runtime by adding a leading bit to each pixel's color index. I don't know what that means, but this is what the Legend of Zelda. All my notes I've gotten from this is the Wikipedia and the Legend of Zelda dungeon website. So I'm kind of like I read through it and I'm like, well, I don't know what that means, but if you're a nerd with this stuff, maybe you'll appreciate it. So the light the light world and the dark world are almost identical in layout, like I talked about before. Of course, it used different texture tiles, and there were subtle differences, like especially like water being present, or even like rocks and stuff like that being at different places. The dark world exists in the game as an overlay of the light world, so it's like basically slapped on top of the other one. So it's not like they had to like recode and remake two completely different worlds. Producer Shigeru Miyamoto originally intended the game to feature a party, actually, one that consists of the protagonist, a magic user, and a girl. The script was written by series newcomer Kensuke Tanabe, while Yoshiaki Koizumi was responsible for the background story explained in the instruction manual. If you wanted to know the story, you had to read the manual. Due to time constraints, even though they had ample time to develop this game, at least at the time, certain features were actually cut from the final release, such as the ability to cause wildfires in grassy areas. Of course, this would be incorporated into Four Swords Adventures. The player was able to freely choose which weapons to hold, and which would be able to swap and combine items, such as using both bombs and arrows at the same time if they wanted to. According to game director Takahashi Tezuka, this did not come to pass as Miyamoto requested that Link always have the sword equipped. So yeah, you couldn't just walk around just like using the bow and arrow and then throwing bombs all the time. You had to use the sword. So Miyamoto conducted an interview back in 1991 about the development of Link to the Past, and he had a lot to share actually on the development process. Some notable quotes in his interview were, at Nintendo, we don't spend a long time or have a lot of employees working on the development of a single game. We start by having a few people developing a title, which lasts about a year. Then we add some more staff who spend about 8 months putting it in the finishing touches. It was in November 1990 that more members were added to Zelda's development team. Basically, we begin by doing a bunch of silly experiments with a small number of people. Then, once the project begins to take shape, we put a larger amount of staff to work on it. If you start messing around with a large number of people, you end up with a bunch of employees with too much time on their hands. I almost think this is like a kind of like a correlation to video game development now, especially with big teams. Specifically, we eke out what system the game is going to use by testing the hardware limits early on, then incorporate things like enemies in the scenario afterwards. Now that graphics have gotten a lot prettier at the time, keep that in mind, I wanted to make animations to match, adding the diagonal movement that Zelda 1 lacked, for example. If you can move diagonally, you would want to cut diagonally with your sword too, right? But when we tried to put in diagonal thrust, the operability of the game declined, and we ended up using a spin attack instead, which I'll talk more about that later. The SNES controller has more buttons, so it was quite difficult to just divvy them up. Players can make a use of a variety of actions in Zelda, like pick up and read. We figured out how to divide the actions between the buttons through trial and error. I'm still worried about whether or not players will figure out that they have to work switches by pressing A and pushing and pulling in the opposite direction. There's certain times in the game where you have to pull things out of the wall, so you have to grab it and then pull it instead of just bashing your character into it or something like that, like in the original Zelda. So that's it's groundbreaking at the time. So if that had been the case, though, players themselves wouldn't understand whether they were intended to pick something up or throw themselves against it, like I talked about earlier. I think they'd be unsatisfied if they'd solve a puzzle by accident when they had intending to pick something up, but the character pulled it instead. However, if we'd made the controls too difficult, there would have been people who didn't learn how to use them. That's why we put in a way to grab things, and the game became the way it is today. It's kind of one of the major quotes. So the score was composed, arranged, and produced by Koji Kondo. He's a legend in the game music space, especially with Legend of Zelda. The overworld theme of The Legend of Zelda, Hyrule Overture, returns in A Link to the Past, obviously redone. The theme is also featured in Light World Overworld and in the end credits. A Link to the Past helped to establish the musical core of the Zelda series. While the first game originated the Hyrule Overture that we've known basically as we can identify as the Legend of Zelda theme, many recurring motifs of the Zelda scores come from A Link to the Past, actually, like Zelda's Lullaby. That's such an amazing theme. Ganondorf's theme, the Hyrule Castle, which was ended up becoming the royal family theme, Kakariko Village, and the select screen, of course, the Fairy Cave as well. These themes have been used in subsequent Legend of Zelda games. Actually, there was a soundtrack that came out at the time to the game, which was entitled Legend of Zelda Sound and Drama. It was released by Sony Records in Japan of June 2nd, 1994. The first disc is 44 minutes long and features rearranged versions of a selection of the game's themes along with a bonus drama track. The second disc features 54 minutes of original arrangements from the game and those of actually the original NES game. I actually looked on eBay for this. It is, for the actual original 2-disc soundtrack, and it is quite expensive, well over $300. So, I don't know if this is worth it to you. You can go on eBay and find it right now. Some other notable tracks were the Dark World theme, the opening demo track, which plays after the title screen plays out and showcases the story so far, and its other variation, Time of Falling Rain, which plays in the opening scene. There are so many more iconic tracks. I really just can't list them all. To me, this has the best soundtrack out of all the titles. I mean, there are great tracks and themes from all the other games before and after this, but for me, Link to the Past is the complete package. It has so many good, iconic tracks. Interestingly enough, there were a few localization changes. At the time, Nintendo was a little bit kind of sensitive to religious references, and the Japanese versions of the Legend of Zelda games, there was a lot of religious references. You'll see some original Legend of Zelda art that has Link with his shield, and it has a kind of like the Christian cross. It has a cross on it, and that was the only game it was featured in. They took it out pretty much for the future of the series. The most obvious change with The Link to the Past was the subtitle, which was renamed from Kamigami no Triforce, which was Triforce of the Gods, to A Link to the Past. Like I mentioned earlier, it was initially titled as Legend of Zelda 3, and I think that was like a placeholder until they came up with what they came up with, which was A Link to the Past. The font used to represent an unreadable language, which was Hylian, was based on Egyptian hieroglyphics, which carry religious meanings, and it was altered in the English version, which is kind of an interesting take. There is a part in the game I know where in order to read Hylian, you have to actually pick up a book in a library that can help you decipher it, which is kind of cool. Aghanim, who was portrayed as a priest in the game, actually is a wizard in the American version. The church in the game largely remains intact with no offending religious references. It's just a chapel, so to speak, they call it. So, A Link to the Past was actually set for release in March of 1991. At this time, additional staff were hired to complete the game by adding further elements into the game, such as more enemies and kind of like an expanding scenario. According to Miyamoto, these elements took an additional 8 months to develop. It was released in Japan of that year, November 21st, and then North America and Europe follow the next year. And like I said, in 1992, the game was a commercial success upon release, obviously. In Japan, it topped the Famitsu sales charts during November and December 1991, and then January of the next year. Became the best-selling 1991 release. Not bad for a late release. In the United States, it became the third best-selling game, 1992. It fell under Sonic the Hedgehog 2 and Street Fighter 2. Probably the one and only time Sonic the Hedgehog beat out Legend of Zelda. We'll never see that again, unfortunately. Hey, who knows? With 1 million units sold. It had an exceptionally long stay at Nintendo Power's top games list. It was ranked number 2 in Nintendo Power's issue in their last issue in December 2012, which is kind of cool. A Link to the Past had more than 5 consecutive years in the number 1 spot and for the Nintendo Power magazine. It was later re-released as a Player's Choice title in North America, indicating that it had sold a minimum of 1 million copies there. Worldwide, it was one of the best-selling Super Nintendo games with 4.61 million units sold as of 2004. The Player's Choice version has the sickest cover art. And actually, I wanted the game in box, and I have the game in box, but I have the player's choice version. It has kind of like it's got the same cover in it, with the Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past with the sword and the shield and stuff like that. Really cool cover. But the player's choice one had this kind of like rock granite looking background that kind of gave it this weathered look, and the cart has that same kind of the cart art has the same kind of look to it too. It just looks really cool. And even though it has the big like sticker that says player's choice on it, I'm not looking at that. I'm looking at the rest of it. So it's really cool. It's slightly less expensive than the original box. So I want to say it's probably going around for $200 some right now, 250 complete in box. So different, you may find different things. I think there was a map that came with it, so you could or could not find it. I actually have the original map hanging up in a picture frame on my wall in my game room. So all right, so let's get into the story. And I got to remind you here, there are full spoilers ahead here. Before the events of the game, a band of evil thieves managed to open a gateway to the Golden Land, where the mystical Triforce was hidden. Upon finding the sacred golden relic, the leader of the thieves, Ganondorf, slew his followers, because he's a jerk, and claimed it as his own. Before long, dark power begins to flow forth from the sacred realm. People were drawn into this darkness and then never heard from again. As a result, the king of Hyrule ordered the 7 wise men to seal the entrance to the sacred realm, which, of course, at this time was now known as the Dark World. A great battle ensued. Monsters poured into the Light World, which Light World we consider as Hyrule, from this sacred land and attacked the castle. The Knights of Hyrule defended the sages during this great battle against evil, and though most of them perished in the struggle, the sages were able to cast their seal, stopping the flow of darkness and trapping the evil demon King Ganon within. The battle became known as the Imprisoning War. Now, with the Legend of Zelda lore, what's considered the Imprisoning War and the Age of Imprisonment, which was a title in line with the Breath of the Wild timeline. Like I said, let's not make it confusing, because even I'm like, is it the same thing? I don't think it is, but I mean, my brain still hurts thinking about it. So, as far as what I know, Age of Imprisonment and Imprisoning War, completely different things. Once the conflicts against Ganon had ceased, Hyrule entered a time of peace, which lasted for centuries, until one day when unexplained catastrophes began to occur. Pestilence, drought ravaged the land. Thinking the recent disasters plaguing Hyrule were somehow linked to the sage's seal, the king investigated it, but found it to be intact. Not, surprising. Desperate for answers, he'd offered rewards for anyone who could find the source of Hyrule's troubles. In response, a stranger named Aghanim appeared as if from nowhere, just out of nowhere, just some wizard stepping in and saying, "Hey, I think I could fix this with magic." As a reward, the king gave him a new position as chief advisor to the throne. Ugh. And the common folk proclaimed him their hero. Once more, peace appeared to have returned to Hyrule, yet all was not well. Aghanim began to govern Hyrule in place of the king and abused his political power as he saw fit. Rumors spread saying that Aghanim planned to kill the king and take the crown for himself, which of course he does. He kills the king, and then strange magical experiences were taking place within the castle tower at night. He cast spells on the soldiers and kidnapped the young maidens descended from the 7 wise men, using their powers in an attempt to break the seal placed on the sacred realm by their ancestors to free Ganon. He manages to successfully send 6 of the 7 into the Dark World, and the last one remaining is in desperate need of help, Zelda herself. The game opens up with this plea for help. The game starts with a boy in green named Link being awakened in the middle of the stormy night by a telepathic plea from Princess Zelda, the Princess of Hyrule, and the 7th and final maiden herself, who tells him that she is being held prisoner in the dungeon of the castle and needs help. Now wide awake, Link finds his uncle with a sword and shield in hand. He tells Link not to leave the house and sets off for the castle. Link ignores his uncle's warning and follows him, only to arrive at the castle to find him gravely wounded. He gives Link his weapons and entrusts him with the fate of Princess Zelda. Link proceeds to rescue Zelda himself, and the two escape the castle through its sewer system to the sanctuary just north of the castle. There, the priest tells Link that the only weapon powerful enough to defeat Aghanim was the sacred Master Sword. He then sends him to find the elder Sarashrala, Oh God, it's like I see the letters, and I'm like, Sarashrala. It's like I internalize it in my head, and I never say it out loud. I want to say this is the first time probably I've said it out loud. Anyway, Sarashrala, God, I hope I'm saying it right, was the descendant of the seven wise men, who explains that not just anyone could wield the legendary blade, and that a hero must appear from the descendants of the knights of Hyrule to prove himself worthy of wielding the blade of evil's bane, which is another name for the Master Sword. Link would need to acquire 3 pendants of virtue scattered in 3 dungeons: the Eastern Palace, the Desert Palace, and the Tower of Hera. In the Eastern Palace, you acquire the bow and arrow, and you fight a band of thieves dressed as knights. In the Desert Palace, you acquire the Power Glove, which allows you to pick up large rocks and boulders, and fight Lamnola, which was a large sandworm. If you saw the movie Tremors, think that. Lastly, in the Tower of Hera, you acquire the Moon Pearl and fight Moldrum, another worm-like creature that can actually knock you off the level you're fighting him on. That this actually enemy kind of spawns as a regular enemy in the game too as well, and he actually gets featured in other games too, especially in like Link's Awakening. The Moon Pearl grants you the ability to maintain your true form when you go into the Dark World. During your run north in the Death Mountain region, when you're going to the Tower of Hera, you have to jump back and forth between the dark and light world. And when you actually go into the dark world, you manifest as a little pink bunny, little pink rabbit. Now that you got all the pendants, Link heads to the Lost Woods, and takes the Master Sword out of its pedestal, waiting for the true hero himself. When I was a kid seeing this, I felt like the biggest friggin' badass ever. It was such an epic walk up to it, with the animals kind of skirting across your path, the fog and the haze over it, and then you see the Master Sword there, and then just the music that crescendos right when you pick it up and you hold it up, and right after that, the overworld theme kicks in, and now you're ready to take on anybody that steps in your way. Just thinking about that is giving me goosebumps, man. It's such an iconic, epic scene that it's, for me, I was there in the beginning. I was so glad to have experienced that. Of course, time is of the factor, as immediately after you take the Master Sword out, Link is contacted telepathically by Princess Zelda. She yells out that soldiers are coming to the sanctuary and then screams. Link hurries off to the sanctuary only to find that he was a moment too late. The priest tells the young hero that the soldiers have already taken the princess off to Hyrule Castle before dying. He just basically blinks out of existence in the game. Once again, Link hurries to her rescue, storming through the gates of Hyrule Castle, fighting enemies along the way. He can now access the gates with the Master Sword. He breaks the barrier that doesn't allow him to enter. And once again, of course, he arrives too late, as Aghanim, already in the process of sending Princess Zelda to the Dark World to finish his ordeal. Upon completing this ritual, at last banishing all 7 maidens to the Dark World, little time was needed before the Sage's seal was completely broken. Link goes on to fight Aghanim himself in a dead man's volley duel, which has Link parrying magical attacks toward his opponent with the power of the Master Sword. Although the young hero manages to injure him, the Dark Wizard also suddenly draws Link into the Dark World, saying he's not truly defeated yet. And just when you thought the game was over, you thought Aghanim was the last enemy. We got no inclination that Ganon was going to be the enemy here, but at this time we just thought Aghanim was the main villain. So you thought the game was over, you thought you beat the big baddie. Now you're transported into the Dark World with a fully fledged map mirroring the Light World. It's basically like a whole other game just opened up, and this blew my mind as a kid. A lot of things blew my mind playing this game when I was a kid. Here, Link is contacted telepathically by Sarashrala, who tells him that the world he is standing in is actually once the Golden Land, but was transformed by Ganon's evil wish by the Triforce to conquer the world to become the Dark World. The shtick with the Triforce, if you don't know, is that it has 3 components to it: power, wisdom, and courage. In most cases, power is usually represented by Ganon. He's always had a lust for power. And when one possesses all 3 parts, you can make any wish come true. Since in this case, Ganon has all 3, before the game's story began, he turned the Golden Land into the Dark World, like I mentioned before. Sarashrala then commissions Link with the task of rescuing all 7 imprisoned maidens from the dungeons scattered across this twisted parallel land. When you spawn into the Dark World, right at this scene, you spawn on top of a large pyramid. You make your way down into the overworld. So now we got to hit all 7 dungeons: the Dark Palace, the Swamp Palace, Skull Woods, Gargoyle's Domain, Ice Palace, Misery Mire, and Turtle Rock. After saving the 7 maidens, I'm not going to go through all of them, including Princess Zelda herself, Link travels to Ganon's Tower, where the 7 maidens use their combined power to dispel the powerful barrier, sealing off the entrance. Link proceeds to traverse the tower and then defeat Aghanim a second time, this time killing him for good. Upon his defeat, the spirit of Ganon himself rises from the body, turns into a bat, and flies off into the Pyramid of Power, where Link chases after it and then faces off against the Dark Beast for the final battle. With the power of the silver arrows and the Master Sword, or optionally the tempered golden sword if you go through that route, it's a little bit extra, you acquire during gameplay, Link ultimately vanquishes Ganon. The young hero soon recovers the full Triforce, and by making a peaceful wish, reverts the effects of Ganon's evil reign over Hyrule, and ultimately restores the land to its former glory, and also resurrects the King of Hyrule. Nice of him. Link himself, as the savior of Hyrule, would become known as the hero of legend. Anytime you hear about this hero of legend, this is the Link that we're referring to. And there are tons of side stories and content that are in this game that I can't go through it all without literally giving you a full walkthrough, which this isn't what this is about. One story that stood out in my mind, actually, as a kid, was the story of the Flute Boy. And you see him as an apparition if you wander into the Lost Woods early on in the game. You walk up to him and then he just disappears. And, there's no story context as to who this kid is. And you hear about him from the Flute Boy's father in Kakariko Village. He tells Link that his son went off and searched the Golden Power and just never returned. When Link visits the Kakariko Village Inn, he is told by the innkeeper at this time how the Flute Boy had a pet bird who flew with him everywhere, and how they went to Death Mountain but never returned. Later on, when Link enters the Dark World equivalent of the Haunted Grove, so it was Lost Woods, and Light World, Haunted Grove, Dark World, he finds the Flute Boy transformed into this strange creature as a result of the Golden Power's effects by Ganon, and it's like this aardvark-looking creature. So, and obviously, when you go, if you don't have the Moon Pearl, you don't maintain your original form. Like earlier, Link was transformed into this like pink bunny creature thing. So, the Flute Boy tells Link that he's buried his flute with some flower seeds in the Light World's Haunted Grove, or the Lost Woods, asking him to search for it. When Link agrees to this request, the Flute Boy gives him the shovel so Link can dig it up. After Link finds the flute and brings it back to him in the Dark World, the Flute Boy says he cannot play it anymore. He then asks Link to give it to his father. He finally requests Link to play the flute so he can hear it one final time. After Link plays the flute at its full theme, the boy petrifies into a tree, and his apparitions cease to exist in the Light World, implying basically he dies, man. I mean, as a kid, this hurt to watch. It's, death is always implied in video games, especially at the time. And you rarely have you ever felt attached to characters that have died. You could probably see characters that maybe die in storylines or whatever. That's just like, oh, they're dead. But like, this felt different. And this was such a sad, melancholy story about a boy that just, was probably fooled into seeking the Golden Power, probably wanted a better life for himself and for his family, and just got lost, unfortunately, and, succumbed to darkness. And just watching him like die and petrify into a tree in front of you, man, that was tough. I thought like, oh man, I was going to save this kid. I was going to bring him back to the Light World, reunite him with his father. And then all of a sudden, done, man, it was, whew, that was tough to watch. There is actually an interesting belief by longtime fans that Ganon, when you fight Ganon in the final boss battle, he actually is wielding and possession of the full completed Triforce. This is why, in some cases, some people think they call him the hero of legend to be the ultimate Link, because Ganon was at full form and Link still defeated him while he was in full form with the Triforce. And I alluded to this earlier, since, like I said, Ganon had the full Triforce when he made his wish, when he turned the Sacred Realm into the Dark World. However, on the contrary, as explained in-game and in the instruction manual and in the official strategy guide, The main antagonist, although he's powerful, does not have it or any fragment thereof within him during this encounter. Ganon indeed managed to obtain it prior to the game's events, like I said earlier, and made that evil wish. But he was sealed into the Dark World by the 7 wise men, and he cannot escape with his own power, which itself explains why he needs the help from Aghanim at this time. The misconception at this time likely comes from the Triforce's symbol being visible on the floor during that final battle, and thinking like he's in possession of the Triforce, and you're fighting against him and that as well. So some other interesting tidbits in this game. It is the first game that introduced a different Link, as opposed to the Legend of Zelda and the Adventure Link prior, which featured the same incantation or incarnation of the hero. And this is all explained in the Hyrule Historia, Zelda Encyclopedia. There's actually hardcover books that explain a lot of the story and explain a lot of the kind of the timeline, I guess. A Link to the Past is also the first game in the series to include multiple parallel overworlds. The iconic Master Sword makes its debut in this game. Prior games had its precursor to basically called itself the Magical Sword, which would become an important and often essential item in Link's quest in almost all of the later installments of this franchise, as well as his trademark weapon and other appearances. Every art you see, he's wielding this Master Sword. Few games like Ocarina of Time and Twilight Princess feature it with a similar function and purpose as in the Super NES game. Although they have technically appeared in previous NES games, A Link to the Past introduces the sages and would play similar roles in Ocarina of Time and, of course, A Link Between Worlds. The dungeons became more thematically distinctive, reflecting different architectures and purpose, different environments, different atmospheres. Dungeons based on forest, water, and ice, for instance, are played for the first time here. This is the first water temple. As if you're a longtime Zelda fan, when you hear water temple, you're going to be in for it. This was the first official water temple dungeon in the series. It all started here. This installment is first where Princess Zelda plays actually a proper role in the series. This is the first game to have pieces of heart as well, which opens you up to having more side quests to explore the overworld to get more of these heart pieces. You don't just, you automatically get heart pieces when you defeat enemies, but if you want more lives, you want more, health, you want to hunt for these heart pieces. Hyrule Castle also makes its first on-screen appearance in the series. This is the first game that introduces the Cuckoos, as well as the infamous Cuckoo Revenge Squad, where a flock of Cuckoos will attack Link if he himself attacks one continuously. Do not attack the Cuckoos. Don't be that guy. Don't be that girl. Leave him alone. Kakariko Village and Lake Hylia make their first appearance in this game as well. This is also the first Zelda game where a member of Link's family is shown, in this case, his uncle. The only other games that do this are the Wind Waker, his grandmother, and the Minish Cap. This is the first game to give the Moblins enemy their pig-like appearance, which would become a series staple after Ocarina of Time as well. You got many recurring musical themes, as I alluded to before, like the Fairy Fountain, Zelda's Lullaby, the Hyrule Castle theme, and even Ganon's theme, first introduced in this game. This is the first Zelda game where Link swings his sword horizontally, introduces that iconic spin attack. You hold the button down, you wait for your sword to, get all this energy, and you do this crazy spin attack that eliminates any enemies that you're surrounded by. Very powerful attack. Very cool, man. It was so awesome to see that. The name Ganondorf is actually introduced and heard only once by one of the maidens, though Ganon's human form would not make his first appearance until Ocarina of Time, which is was an interesting art choice. This title actually marks the first appearance of the actual Sacred Realm or Golden Land, and also remains the only time it is a playable overworld as the Dark World. So, what did this game mean to me? And it's in my top 10 for a reason, not just because, and not just because it's a great game. Arguably, you could say it's one of the best Zelda games within the entire franchise. And I know that's a subjective tape for anybody to say. Everybody always has fonder memories of the first one that they played, and they have nostalgia for certain games. There's a lot of a lot of people I've talked to who think Majora's Mask is the best Zelda game of all time. Ocarina of Time, Breath of the Wild. I mean, I totally get it. I get all of it, but for me, Link to the Past really kind of cemented myself as a Zelda fan. Like, this is a franchise I want to stick with. I rented a Super Nintendo from Blockbuster Video when I was a kid, a couple months after this game came out, actually. And admittedly, I was a huge fan of Adventures of Link more so than the original Legend of Zelda, which is weird to say, I know, but I was a dumb kid back then. I think I liked more the action focus that Adventure of Link had. I don't know. Like I said, dumb kid. When I saw the graphics for the new Zelda title in Nintendo Power Magazine, I wanted an SNES at the time really bad, just for this game, pretty much. But I had a Sega Genesis at the time, and my mom wouldn't let me have two systems. I eventually got one later on. I think my uncle got me one for Christmas. My brother was just talking about this just recently, how my uncle just he's like, "What do you guys want?" And I said, "I want a Super Nintendo." So he's like, "All right, fair." But my experience with playing A Link to the Past when I was a kid was renting the SNES when my grades were good. And of course, when I got my own, bought the game myself. The initial shock of hearing the music hit me the most. It was so symphonic, and it felt like I was watching a movie. Like, I felt like I was actually in it. The mature storyline that was presented to me before the game, there was actually a fully fledged out story that the game was telling me, which was really cool, with interactions and talking to people and interacting with other people and having just like having it be more conversations instead of I am error. You know, uh, this blew my 11-year-old brain away, and it wasn't long until I was playing and I stepped out into the rain after hearing Zelda's plea. You always remember those. I mean, you always remember those first memories you had of things when you were younger, and that's that strong feeling that nostalgia has, is that it brings you back. You remember every feeling or every emotion you had at the time when you first experienced something. The first time you heard a song, first time you saw a movie, or even just like the environment you were in, or even the things that you were doing around that time. And when you heard those things, played those first video games, first hearing those music, or even hearing news and remembering where you were, or what you were doing at the time. That's the strong art that nostalgia has on people, is that you remember how you experienced it. When I stepped out of the house as Link, seeing the rain pouring down, the sound effects invading my speakers, that suspenseful music piping through over the rain, I was entranced. I couldn't believe that this was where the next generation was going. Graphics looked dark, thick, smooth lines, and that's obviously comparing it to the previous 8-bit generation. Graphics don't normally look like that anymore. The colors contrasted with the dark lines, shadows on the screen. It was popping, man. The graphics looked so great. The enemies were plentiful. It had this intelligent AI that challenged me all the way through the game, making me feel like one powerful ass warrior. As a kid, this game blew me away and cemented me as a Zelda fan for life. I liked the first two Zelda games, but Link to the Past, I was like, I'm in. I'm in. I'm playing every mainline game after this. Admittedly, I didn't play much of the Game Boy games, like the Game Boy Advance games and the Game Boy Color games. I had a Game Boy Color game, but I think I was more interested in the mainline games, for the main systems. Obviously, the main game we got after this was Ocarina of Time, and then it just kind of kept going after that. So, like I said, to this day, it remains as my favorite Zelda game of all time. And I know that every mainline Zelda game that came out after this was better than the previous by some subjective accounts. Nothing will replace those memories I had with this game when I first played it. And I play it once a year, or at least once a year. I still get that same wonder and thrill every time I step out of the house to go rescue Princess Zelda right from the start. I always step out and I always sit there for at least a few seconds, and I just appreciate the music, the rain, the sound effects, the sound of my boots slashing through the grass, and just I take a second to appreciate that moment of just like, wow. And it's like, granted, I don't get that same sense of awe and wonder that I got the first time I saw it. I still get some sort of feeling or some sort of emotion or reaction. I mean, how many games can do that to you? To me, this game has the best balance of everything: combat, graphics, music, colors, presentation, difficulty, story, conversations, interactions. I mean, it does it all great. And I would argue that even newer, younger players to this day and age, like, can pick it up and have a great time with it. It's not dated. It actually aged like bourbon, aged like a fine wine, and can be enjoyed for many years to come, I think. I mean, like I said, I would say, like, if you're a young listener listening to this, pick it up. Play it on your Nintendo Switch, on the Switch Online, and I think you'll enjoy it more than maybe you think. Granted, it's, like I said, a 30-year-old game at this point, well over 30 years, but like I said, aged like fine wine. If you do play it for the first time, though, let me know on my social medias and tell me what you think. That about wraps it up in this episode. Thanks for listening to my first episode in my top 10 series. In the future, you'll see some of my other games from my other top 10 games. I'll be talking about games like Mega Man 2, Mass Effect 2, Resident Evil 2, a lot of 2s. And I think Shinobi 3 is in there as well. So you'll be hearing me talk about all those games. They'll get their own full episodes. Follow me on my socials on X, Threads, and Instagram at RetroXPodcast. Whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on, be sure to follow and enable notifications so you can find out when I drop a new episode. Episodes are also live on YouTube, and be sure to follow me there as well at RetroXPodcast. I do want to thank the Hair of the Dogcast Network for allowing me in their group of shows, and consider contributing to us on Patreon at patreon.com/hairofthedogcast, and join the community where you can get early access and exclusive episodes every week. Well, thanks for listening, guys.